How you doing, David?
Hey, how's it going?
Good. How you doing?
I'm awesome.
All right. Are you at least 18 and are you a believer?
I am both.
Awesome. And which God do you believe in?
I believe in the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, Yahweh.
Okay. Do you believe in Jesus?
I do.
Okay. So, also, there's like some radio or TV in the background. Can you turn that down?
That's football.
Yeah.
And
Can you
God
turn it
watches
down?
football.
I mean, you can definitely
Yeah, I
watch
can
it,
do
but
that.
we don't need to hear it.
Gotcha.
Also, I forgot to set my lineup today. I don't have anyone injured playing. My goodness, I'll be in a lot of trouble if I've got an injury on my lineup.
It's the Lions and Texans. Nobody's getting injured.
All right. So, what's your most convincing evidence or argument for why the Christian God is real?
The word itself is the evidence because the word is inspired by God.
And how do you know that to be the case?
When Moses wrote the first 5 books of the Bible, he was inspired by God when he wrote it. He wrote it through direct testimony of the people that were actually in the lineage when the things happened in the book.
How do you know that Moses wrote it?
If you read the first 5 books of the Torah or the Bible, it tells you that he wrote it.
Actually, it doesn't. Can you give me that citation? Because there's a bunch of passages that it clearly make it impossible for him to write it. So, for example, Genesis 14:14, when Abraham heard that his nephew had been taken captive, he led forth his trained men, born in his house, 318 of them, and went in pursuit as far as Dan. Where is Dan, according to the Bible?
Dan is what is now Syria.
Yep, it's at the edge of Syria. It's like the northernmost tribe. And when was Dan established?
What's your name?
When was Dan established?
I'm going to answer that. What's your name?
Johannes.
Johannes. Are you the only Johannes that's ever been born?
We're talking about a region.
I got that. Are you the only Johannes that's ever been born?
Yep.
Is there any other person on the earth named Johannes?
Oh, yeah.
Is it possible?
Mm-hmm.
So you're assuming that Dan, who is a child of Israel, Jacob, is the same Dan that they're pertaining to in
No,
that verse.
it's
And
not a
that's not
person.
correct.
It's not a person. It's a location.
It's
So
a location named after a person,
yeah, and when did that person live?
obviously before Abraham.
Nope. The tribe of Dan was established after the conquest. In fact, it was
There you
long
go.
after the conquest.
That's why I said, that's exactly why I said that first.
There we go. Okay,
Because
so
you're
there's no
assuming that the
evidence.
person that it's named after is the son of Israel, but it's not. It's another person named Dan.
It's not. Okay, that's just a nonsense claim in history. You can't find me any evidence that there was a location named Dan before the Iron Age. Well, before the late Bronze Age. You're just making up stuff now.
No, I'm not making anything.
The location of Dan was established by the tribal allotment of Dan in the Bible, which means Moses didn't write it because Moses died before the tribal allotment was given.
Again, you're assuming that Dan that they're talking to was named after the son of Israel, and it was not. It was a different Dan.
So you think there's a different Dan that established
Yes.
a city-state in the northernmost region of Israel. It just happened to be named Dan. And then hundreds and hundreds of years later, a guy named Dan, who had a people group named after him called Dan, reestablished the exact same people group in the exact same location. That's what you think happened?
I don't believe it was the exact same location, but I believe that's a possibility.
That's crazy. That's crazy. So the fact of the matter is, there was no tribe of Dan up there until the Israelites established it. That's just factually untrue. It also says crazy things as well. So, for example, in the book of Genesis, it talks about, was it chapter 36? Give me a second to find the passage. There we go. Yeah, chapter 36, 31 was the one I was thinking of. It says, these are the kings who reigned in the land of Edom before any king reigned over the Israelites. Wow, it really seems like whoever wrote this wrote after the Israelites had their first king.
No, the first 5 books of the Bible are a history and a chronology, just like the book of Kings
Actually,
and Judges and Chronicles.
You didn't hear what I said.
It's a chronology.
Okay, whoever's writing
So
here says that these are the kings who reigned in Edom, in the land of Edom, before any king reigned over Israel. So whoever's writing this knows that there have been kings in Israel.
There were.
Yeah, and he's talking about them in the past tense. He's saying
no, there were kings over
before
Edom.
any
you
king,
read that.
any
it
king,
before any
king
kings who reigned in the land of Edom.
Yeah,
that's the kings of Edom, not the kings of Israel.
Keep reading. Before what?
Before any kings reigned over Israel.
Yes,
that's
yes.
self-explanatory.
And when was there a king in Israel? Well, who's the first king?
There were no kings, there were judges.
Yes, and when was the first king?
Deborah.
No, Deborah was a judge. Who was the first king?
I mean, I'll take that.
Everyone knows it here except for the guest. Go ahead, Deb.
Samuel.
Nope, he was a prophet.
Samuel was a king.
No, he wasn't.
And Saul was a king.
Saul was the first king. Yeah. Saul was the first king. He was anointed by Samuel, and that was hundreds of years after Moses. That's around the turn of the century, around 1000. So whoever wrote this obviously wrote after Israel had some kings, because he's saying that some things happened, and these things happened before any king had yet to reign over Israel. So it's clearly not Moses. And we've literally just begun. Do you think that Moses wrote about his own death?
No.
Oh, you don't think so? Okay. So he couldn't have written that portion. What about Numbers 12:3? Says the man Moses was very humble, more so than anyone else on the face of the earth. Do you think Moses wrote that he was the most humble man on earth? Did you hear my question?
Yes, and I think that if you write a biography about yourself, that it's possible for you to do so, to relate yourself into the third person.
So you think Moses literally wrote that he is the most humble man on earth?
Mine says meek, but yeah, I agree with that.
Okay, so the most humble man on earth said that he's the most humble man on earth. Is it humble to brag about yourself?
That's not boasting or bragging.
Okay, so when he says he's the most humble man on earth,
characteristic.
that's not boasting or bragging. Okay.
No.
Fantastic. And what do we do? Oh, shoot. I just copy and pasted. I copied when I should have pasted. Let me grab another verse. Leviticus 8:21 is really interesting. It says, after the entrails, this is referring to the Levitical sacrifices, what to do with the animals. After the entrails and the legs were washed with water, Moses turned into smoke the rest of the ram on the altar. It was a burnt offering for a pleasing odor, an offering made by fire to the Lord, as the Lord had commanded Moses. Why is Moses constantly writing about himself in the third person? Can you find a single historical work in all of history where this is how the story is told? A person writing about himself in the third person?
The autobiography of Malcolm X.
Actually, I haven't read that. Anyone here read that one? Does Malcolm X write the entire story in the third person?
Yes, he does.
So he doesn't say I in the book.
Frederick Douglass did the same thing.
You might be right. I haven't read it. I don't know. Anyone else here actually read that? I'm going to pull it up. I guarantee I can get a PDF copy of it. I'm hearing a lot of people in the comments who read it said that's not what happened. They said it's in the first person. Are you lying to me right now?
I'm not lying to you, not to my knowledge, no.
Because I've got a copy of it right here. I just pulled it up. The autobiography of Malcolm X as he told Alex Haley. Oops.
Right.
So this is being told by Alex Haley, not by Malcolm X.
The other problem as well is that
So when you say that, perfect. So when you say that, is it possible that Moses could have, I'm sure you're aware of the Quran, how the Prophet Muhammad he didn't actually transcribe the Quran because he was illiterate, but what he did was he told his brother, and his brother wrote it down. Now, is it possible that Moses could have told this story to someone else, possibly Aaron, possibly Nan, and they wrote it down for him?
It's possible. We have no evidence of it. Also, Malcolm X's autobiography is in the first person. I remember waking up to the sound of my mother's screaming again. When I scrambled out, I saw the police in the living room. They were there trying to calm her down. The whole thing's in the first person. You need to repent for lying.
Perhaps a bigger point here is that just because something is possible doesn't mean it's likely.
Yeah.
The time to believe the claim is after sufficient evidence. If you start with the assumption that it has to be this belief, then yeah, you're going to come to that conclusion. But then that just says, do you actually care about the truth over being comfortable with what you thought to do?
Yeah, it sounds to me like he's, rather than saying this is the best answer for the evidence that we have, he's trying to run towards, well, as long as it's possible, then it's still true. But something being possible doesn't make it true. What makes it likely to be true is whether or not the evidence actually points towards it.
Exodus chapter 3, verse 13.
Yep.
Then Moses said to God, if I come to the people of Israel and say to them, the God of your fathers has sent me to you, and they ask me, what is the name? What shall I say to them?
Yeah, because it's recording a conversation of Moses. And that's what Moses said.
So that's what we agree on.
Yeah, it said Moses said something.
Right. So we
And
agree that it's possibly it was written by someone else.
Yeah,
and
it's clearly written by
verbalized
somebody
by
else.
Moses.
No, I don't believe it's verbalized by Moses because the author knows things that Moses wouldn't have known, and it also gets facts wrong. For example, it says that they built the storehouses of Pithom and Ramses. That could only be true if whoever was writing after the 1200s. But Moses, according to the Bible, made an Exodus in the 1400s. So 200 years off.
That was around 1256. The Exodus was around 1256.
Not according to 1 Kings. Have you read 1 Kings?
I have.
And what does it say? I'll put it on the screen. 1 Kings chapter 6. In the 480th year after the Israelites came out of the land of Egypt, in the 4th year of Solomon's reign over Israel, in the month of Ziv, which is the second month, he began to build the house of the Lord. So according to 1 Kings chapter 6, the Exodus was 480 years prior to Solomon beginning the building of the temple. And that started in 970 BCE. So all you got to do then is take 970 and figure out what 480 years is. It puts you right in the middle of the 1400s. Yep, 1450. So no way they built the storehouses of Pithoms and Ramses when Ramses was still 200 years away from being born. There's
Darn
no...
those
What's that, Phil?
I said, darn those pesky facts.
I know, right? There's just no evidence in the book that Moses wrote it. Like, you only believe Moses wrote it because you want to believe Moses wrote it, but the evidence doesn't point towards that.
Okay, next.
All right, we'd also do Genesis 21, which is highly anachronistic. It says, when they made a covenant at Beersheba, Abimelech, with Phicol, the commander of his army, left and returned to the land of the Philistines. But the Philistines hadn't existed in the land of Israel until the collapse of the empire in the 1170s. There was no Philistines at the time of Abraham and Abimelech. So whoever wrote this obviously wrote after the Philistines entered the land. So it's not just not from Moses, it's also just not true. And it's full of other errors. Like the Messiah in this book can't quote the Old Testament correctly. He misquotes it every time. He didn't fulfill any prophecies. Daniel Silva, thank you for the super chat. Daniel says, debate Sam Shamoon and God Logic. WrestleMania. Yeah, I mean, listen, I'll debate anybody. I don't really care who it is, but I can't control who comes on the platform, you know? Do you believe that the earth stood still according to Joshua chapter 10?
I do.
What would happen if the earth stopped rotating?
It would sink out of orbit.
They do a lot of things, yeah.
The Philistines first appear in historical records around 1200 BCE.
That's what I said, 1170 during the collapse. Mm-hmm. And Moses lived in the 1400s according to 1 Kings chapter 6. So there's no way that Moses wrote about the Philistines.
So since the Bible was written in Hebrew, the Torah anyway, they were referring to the Ha-Pelishtim, and that was the tribe that preceded the Philistines. So when you translate that word into English, as the Bible is written, that we can understand it, that race was there.
Which race?
And that's who they were referring to.
Which race?
The Ha-Pelishtim. The Ha-Pelishtim.
That's not actually what's in the Hebrew, if I had to take a guess. Let me see what's actually there. Yeah, the Philistines. Yeah. Philistine.
Philistine.
That's what it says. Yes, Philistine.
Philistine.
Yeah, the Philistines. They didn't exist at the time of Moses, so I'm trying to tell you. Whoever wrote the book of Genesis lived after the Philistines entered the land.
Next.